if a company is going to start the process of choosing a private cloud solution, what is a question or a couple questions they should ask vendors as they're out there kicking the tires? Or, what's a question they need to ask themselves before they even, go and do that? What's a preliminary question? Sam, what's your take on that? What questions should people be asking?
Yeah, I think they should definitely start asking themselves questions. And one of the most important questions that I think a company needs to ask is, what are their intended workloads? There are significant differences in the way you architect the cloud, choose vendors, resource and effort, between whether you're targeting, cloud-oriented workloads, web applications, and the like, or traditional enterprise-oriented workloads. So I always advise companies to really think about their intended workloads before they start the effort.
Is there a way to put that in a nutshell in terms of, well, if you want this kind, if you're looking for this kind of workload, you want to go in this direction. If you have this kind of workload in that direction, or is it too complex to boil that down?
In some ways it's complex, in other ways it's simple. If you're looking primarily at something that is, similar to Amazon Web Services, but within your own environment, something like an OpenStack or Eucalyptus, that's going to be tailored. That's going to be tailored more for web applications. If you're looking for something that's more appropriate for, enterprise applications, maybe giving you, the next layer of automation and self-service on top of your existing virtualization environment. You should be looking, first at that virtualization vendor and seeing what they've got to offer, as well as folks like VirtuStream and others that have enterprise-capable infrastructure as a service offerings, infrastructure as a service management offerings for the private cloud.
Joe, what's a preliminary question you should ask yourself or ask a vendor as you start this process?
Well, I agree with Sam. I would just maybe add a couple of things to what he said, which is, there's certainly the notion of the fit in terms of functionality and security and performance. So if you have existing applications or one that's planned, then the question would be, does that really match the capabilities and the feature set that's in your private cloud selection? To that, though, I would add two things, and I have a few slides on this, but one of the things has to do with the spikiness of the workload. And so I believe that it's important to assure flexibility between private and public, and consequently also there's an economically optimal selection of which one you would pick that is largely based on the variability and unpredictability of your demand. So that to me would be a critical capability on top of that, right? So kind of, using Sam's criteria, you would narrow down your selection of possibilities to those that are even a fit for your workload or set of workloads. And then on top of that, I would add in the application variability to determine even whether a private cloud strategy makes sense or whether you should be thinking public all the way or should be thinking in terms of hybrid. And then based on that, if hybrid is important, you should be looking at compatibility between your private cloud and the public cloud that you're going to have as a hybrid.
When you talked about spikiness of the workload, if it is particularly spiky, does that mean you lean towards public or not necessarily?
Well, I have some slides that I can run through.
You've got an audiovisual helper. There's nothing like an audiovisual helper. Can you pull up one of your slides?
If it's relevant. Tell me how to share an app. I guess it's the More button, right? So here,
I think there's actually a button that says Screen Share. It's the second one, a little green arrow.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
Let's see what happens. We might blow up the internet here, but that's the worst we can do.
Okay, let me
I thought you had to print out your slide and hold it up in front of the...
I know, all these ways are the best ways. I can send it via Morse code to everyone.
Things are changing. That's a good sign.
Move this out of the way. Let me see if I can shut this down.
It's actually nice to kind of have a slide. It'd be nice if you could pull it up.
Yeah,
so your clock and your calendar.
Take this. Thought I had it open, but I'll just go through it. It'll take maybe 3 minutes to cover some concepts, and then I'll shut up after that because the rim shots will start coming. So Can you see Datamation webinar?
I sure do.
Okay. So basically, I go into this in depth in Cloudonomics, but there's a set of equations that kind of characterize some of the performance and economic attributes of the cloud. And I'm going to focus on 2 or 3 of these. One is the first one, the penalty cost reduction that comes about through pooled resources that can occur in a private cloud or a public cloud. A second thing is issues with provisioning delays for the value of on-demand. And then the third thing that's relevant is this notion of under-utility, when exactly a pure cloud or hybrid is best, which is based on things like the peak-to-average ratio. So the first point I'll make is that if you have one workload and it's got a variable demand, in this case I've got it uniformly distributed, and I add in a few more workloads into this shared pool with dynamically allocated capabilities, and then I add in more and more, what's happening is that I get a smoothing effect. And that smoothing effect is sort of ends up in 2 ways it generates benefits, one of which is the notion that I have less overcapacity, so fewer wasted resources and the opportunity costs associated with that, and also less undercapacity and therefore lower missed revenues. So the important thing is...
Do the red bars represent spikes or
Yeah, so these are samples of a workload. So for example, on the upper left, if I have one workload, on Monday maybe it's 0.7 of a load, on Tuesday it's 0.24, on Wednesday it's 0.01 or whatever that is.
Yeah.
And so if I had 4 workloads, on Monday I would be at 0.5, at Tuesday I would be at 0.30 and so forth. And at 100 workloads I basically would be very close to 0.5. And so what that penalty function looks like is something like this. And the important point is, so if I have the x-axis is the number of workloads, and the y-axis is the relative penalty. So at one workload, I'm at 100% of the penalty, but all it takes is one additional workload to get to a 30% reduction. So even though some people make fun of private cloud, and there are issues and opportunities with both private and public, from this penalty function perspective, the point is that I get smoothing effects right away, and in fact that curve is very steep initially, so I actually have a 50% reduction in the penalty cost of over or under capacity at 4 workloads, and by the time I get up to 20, 40, 50, 100 workloads, I'm actually pretty close to achieving the stat muxing and utilization benefits of an infinitely large provider like some of the majors, right? So there are other reasons that you might go with the majors, including the whole, even though I don't like the term CapEx versus OpEx, certainly the required fixed payment versus the pay-per-use ability. The other issue is provisioning delays, and the point here is that if you have any provisioning delay, then your penalty gets exponentially large if you have exponential growth. So that also argues for either private or public, but certainly accelerated provisioning. And then the last thing I'll cover in this go-round of screen sharing is just the math around hybrids. And the point is that it depends on the relative price in terms of the unit cost between your cost for a CPU cycle, virtual machine, versus that of a public cloud provider, which could be less, the same, or more, and also the spikiness of your workload based on a peak-to-average ratio. So that's the P and the A. And the English, very simply put, is if cloud services are less than you can do it yourself, then you should use them. If they cost more than you can do it yourself, then actually if the demand is pretty spiky, you still would want to use a pure cloud solution. And in any event that if there's any variation, you would want to, sorry about that, you would want to go for a hybrid, which makes that opportunity to have some flexibility very important.
It seemed like the bottom line there is that last line with the, if it's going to be really variable, the hybrid solution is your best bet.
Yeah, exactly. And so people kind of simplistically look at unit cost differences, and I think it's much better to, rather than that, look at the total cost, which is partly based on the demand variability, and also one little hidden thing about public versus private is performance differences. And it's hard to simplistically characterize those performance differences because, you know, in some ways the public cloud can perform better, right? So you've got kind of nearly infinite bandwidth coming in if you wanted to. On the other hand, to the extent that you can tune your architecture, and this goes back to Sam's opening comments, to your application, then you may well be able to craft just the right configuration of, you know, I/O bandwidth and memory and everything else that can achieve a massive performance gain versus a one-size-fits-all, or maybe a, you know, probably realistically it's more like 30 size fits many public cloud solution available today.
Michael, there was a lot of math. I mean, I think I flunked college calculus. I'm not sure. But is there a interesting answer, Joe? Michael, is there a couple of questions that you ask or that you recommend companies ask as they start the private cloud solution process, or things they need to ask of themselves?
You know, I have to say, I first met Joe a number of years ago when he was working still at HP. And I saw Joe showed me, I attended a presentation and I saw these equations, right. And I dutifully, this was before he released the book, and I dutifully went back and studied and read this all, and I came away thinking, this guy is about as smart as anybody I ever met. And I still feel that way. But, you know, I spent a lot of time...
But, there's the but. But
no, there's no but. There's no but. There is a but.
We're listening.
I spent a lot of time with CIOs, and I spent time with IT departments, and I almost always take the point of view asking, what do the users want? How can we put together a set of technologies and services that the users will find attractive and that the users will adopt, and that the users will not feel that they have to bypass what IT is doing in order to get their work done in a responsive way and to have the technologies and the products that they need. And so, of course, what Sam said regarding the technology aspects is true, of course. And likewise, what Joe said regarding the economics makes complete sense. But I turn it around and I ask them, what is the impact on the user and addressing user needs? Or are we boiling this down strictly to a technology and an economic argument, which is what IT has been doing pretty much since the beginning of time?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you're talking about the user needs.
Michael's comments real quick.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so I agree completely with that. I think cultural skills, organizational motivation, and behavioral economic issues are absolutely essential. So, you know, just to, you know, give a few examples, I think, you know, for example, the fact that a lot of the major cloud providers have major development communities that are associated with them, you know, that would impact your selection of where to go simply based on the time and cost of retraining your IT staff. Security concerns and perceptions of security concerns or another. Perception of reliability and long-term viability of the provider is key, right? Like, and they may be factual or not, but like it or not, they're an important part of decision-making criteria. So that's I completely agree that there's a broad variety of dimensions in the real world that you need to look at, which is quantitative and qualitative, to really decide what you're going to do and why. And right now, the other thing that we shouldn't discount is the fact that there's a risk to not doing something in the public cloud, which is you would look like a laggard. It's like saying, no, we're not going to use mobile. So that's a completely separate issue, is the perception of kind of your standing as a CIO with the executive team, because let's face it, the CEO is reading all about the cloud while they're pulling the magazine out of the seat back in front of them, or reading the latest Datamation or whatever. And so all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a minute, how come we're not doing this?
I think that's more than just perception. There is a tangible risk of just being caught flat-footed and not being at step with where your competitors are when the market matures.